So, sorry für den Cut. An enormous blue canopy pulverized the beam. It returned the ether, that 3000-degree flame, to nothing as it came in contact with the bullet. The recoil of the Grand Mage Crafter literally boiled her blood. Her body couldn't handle it. Her heart stopped. Her brain went numb from the pain and impact. Her nerves petrified from end to end. But her magic crest revived them all by force. Even though her vision had gone white, she could still see it. Swallowing the blood in her mouth, Aoko looked up with a scowl. There it was. An enormous shield of ice and a sneering, deformed skull.
撃つのが遅すぎた。それとも早すぎた。盾を作られる前に撃てばよかった。それとも正面からじゃ無謀すぎた。どっちでもいい。一層、二層、再起動。急いで。
Nächster Schuss. There was no time to think or hesitate. The magical energy throughout the park began to gather. Aoko knelt across from the tyrannical face of the moon. Aoko intuited that the ice had yet to fully form. Flat Snark still hadn't reached its full strength, which was exactly why. By accelerating the spell, Aoko had damaged her own body. Aoko sat up and braced herself for the pain caused by the load placed on the formula after linking with the Snark. All she could do was endure it. All because... Aoko had gotten a read on their relative strength. Even if its volume of magical energy was identical, Snark's form, its mystique, was in a different league. Even if Aoko could charge the energy to her absolute limit, she would barely make a dent in the ice wall. Meaning, if the Snark gathered as much energy as it could, there was nothing she could do to prevent her annihilation. Es wird größer. She loaded her next shot. She issued order to the floating third layer. Ignoring the toll on her body, she began to accelerate the first layer formula. The role of her right hand's single layer was to absorb and store surrounding magical energy. The thick fog that drifted through the park was an ancient ether spewed out by the Flat Snark's own body. But Aoko could pour it into her formula. Aoko's body, which had integrated with the formula, took on an amount of magical energy that far surpassed its maximum capacity. It seethed in agony, or rather, it trembled in delight. For Mage, magical energy was a propellant to reach the realm of mystiques. The expansion of eternal time, the liquefaction of the self, the release from the physical. What one might call a near-death experience. Aoko stood face to face with reality on the boundary between it and such concept. And that reality was here to break her will. To any bystander, the gap between them would be plain to see. The gun barrel named Aoko Aosaki. She had not a chance to chip away at that lump of ice. She accelerated the spell further. The skull grinned. That ice was no shield. It was something to be used to crush mages who did not know their place. The moon laughed as it prepared to crush not just Aoko, but the boy atop the roller coaster, as well as the park in its entirety. Her circuits were on the verge of going critical. Her body had been charged with a scorching power supply from her fingertips to her eyeballs. She would see it that the bullet fired. See to it that the magecraft formula would be strengthened as quickly as her nerve's transmission speed would allow. A single attack was not enough. There was no way to shoot it from its flank, which meant there was only one solution.
Select alternate.
The third layer began to transform. It switched from direct to alternating current. The spell's supposed strong point was its ability to adjust its trajectory mid-flight, but right now all she wanted was numbers.
Set! Octagram! 全階層ぶん回せ!
A blue sun shined down upon the amusement park. Beams of light at maximum output streaked forth to pierce the golden moon. Das sieht nicht gut aus. Holding down the trigger, she continued to fire, taking an energy ad infinitum. Blue flames shot forth at critical level, but the ice would neither melt nor mar. No amount of sheer heat could make a dent in something formed from such a colossal amount of magical energy. The toll on her circuit sent them berserk, and blood began to run free. The battle had become a tussle over the magical energy that filled the park. From the very beginning, this had been the Snark's home turf. The Snark had control over at least 80% of the space, while Aoko had 20 at best. The castle of ice descended as if to call the match. All she could do was delay the inevitable. She knew that she had been backed into a wall, and right now, the only thing she could do was to keep firing. Then again, perhaps not. There was another option. If she converted all of her magical energy into a defense, there was a tiny chance. No, not tiny, a great possibility in fact, that she could save just herself. Clinging to that broken hope, Aoko continued to rotate her circuits. Time seemed to stop at the magical energy overdose. A second of intense pain lasted an eternity. Then, amidst everything, something approached one step at a time. Something from among the park's shadows. Something. She felt goosebumps from head to toe. The issue was no longer the ice overhead. In the midst of this stillness, the Red Death drew closer, step by ominous step. Her circuits and her mind began to rupture out of terror. The composition of her formula and soul began to rip apart. There it was, just behind her. Its footsteps came to a halt. It reached around and cupped her face in its blood-stained hands.
こんにちは。
Ugh. She wanted to scream out with all her might. This is it. Nothing matters. I couldn't care less. Run or don't run. It doesn't matter. Quit hiding and reveal yourself. Use whatever you can and show no mercy. That was it. She had one final card to play. A miracle that would treat that ice like nothing more than a toy, gifted to her as a mere amusement. That was what the Red Death had come to kill. Using it would spell ruin, and not using it would mean death by ice. But why would Aoko hesitate? There were no conditions limiting her. There would be no price to pay by employing it here. She simply would cease to be herself. That was all. Humans love to exist in areas of grey. Dozens of electrical impulses disconnect in the brain every minute. Nothing lasts forever, not even oneself. It was not anything particularly worthy of disdain. It was not even anything remarkably worthy of being called taboo. What escaped her lips now was rage. Bewilderment from the red silhouette. The girl let out an inaudible scream. Could true magic truly be her savior? What an opportunistic load of bull. After all, to begin with.
あんなのどうやって使えってのよ。
Indeed, Aoko was still in the dark when it came to that magic, whatever it was. Goosebumps. She woke from her momentary hallucination, the very illusion her breaking soul had shown her. Whining had the opposite effect on her. Her bride was now ablaze.
逃げるのか。
Sojo was right. Her opponent had put her in check, but she had done the same to it. It was clear why she was losing, so now all she needed was a counterplan. Well within her abilities. No matter the odds, she was not one to give up without giving it one last shot.
そうだ。放り出すのはやれることを全部やってから。
Her numbed fingers clenched into a tight fist. She was betting against the house, an unreasonable gamble that should have made her question her sanity. If her first step was off by an inch, her body would be instantly vaporized. But she knew a boy who never fled. She knew of a steadfast courage that could shine its light, no matter how small, through any desperate situation. Yes, there was more than just herself to be concerned about. If that ice fell, it would mean the destruction of the park in its entirety. Everything he had achieved, everything he had risked and dared and happily put his life on the line for, would all be for naught.
本当。それじゃあ何のために意地を張ったかわからない。
Beat that shit! Determination and confidence surged through her like electricity. She was in no mood to be crushed by a giant sheet of ice. If she was going to lose, she'd rather do so as the grandest firework possible. Aoko was a sore loser. At this point, she would rather burn herself to cinders than let it decide her end.
Change! Change! Change!
She grunted in pain. Energy raged through her body. Her circuits were on the verge of disintegrating. Inscribed upon her body, her magic crest was magecraft given physical form. It did not, however, stop with simply skin and flesh. It burrowed to the very marrow of her bones. A playful smile graced her lips. Her sense of reason had been turned upside down by the pain. That was only natural.
なんだ、やればできるじゃない私。
She had to brace her own body for holding out so long while pushed beyond its limit. The skull face noticed the abnormality. It finally recognized the challenge for dominance over the space. It laughed at the conceit it faced. Never did it expect a magician to challenge the great flat snark, lord of vessels over a millennium, and in such an age of decline. She tried to catch her breath. She braced herself for the coming pain. She was going to smash that ice to pieces. Both had access to the same amount of magical energy. One of them was greatly outmatched, but...
出力装置に差があった。魔力の吸引、方針の規模で負けているのなら、単純な話、私をでかくするだけでいい。チェンジ！ツアープラン！
Their feedback would go beyond anything she had experienced to date. Quite simply, her decision went beyond recklessness. She expanded both formulae to maximum size. The first layer would transform into a giant vortex, swallowing up the mist. The second layer would process it from the one end and pump it to her, the barrel.
私の想定が甘かった。撃ち落とすなんて半端もいいとこ。この場合、跡形もなく打ち砕くった。
The primeval magical energy responded in concert with her conviction. It formed the pattern of a writhing serpent. Voiceless magical power flying the banner of revolution. She beckoned the great power of old to feast its eye upon the land. For it was the first of the trailblazers. The representative of mankind that knew no fear and would rend all manners of mythic and mystique to naught.
貸し借りはここまでよ、嘘つきブーチャム。お望み通り、年をつけて返してあげる。
For the newest magician commanded the principle of consumption and extinction. An aberrant bullet of light melted through the castle of ice. Her barrel was tempered. Her control of magical energy was divine. Her veins, totaling 62,000 miles in length, or 2.5 times the circumference of the equator, accepted the flow of magical energy with avarice. The subsequent magic bullets swiftly flew straight into the moon. No, 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 no! Death rose to the surface of the moon. A cry of terror, of indignation, echoed through the abandoned park. Reality was burned into the eyes of this creature of fantasy. As Aoko looked upon its vain attempt to struggle, she knew she had tasted victory. victory despite her absolute reckless use of magical energy. The energy scales had been tipped to their breaking point, but nevertheless in her favor.
ツアープランブラックライトスターボー一気にぶち抜け
Shatter, 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 shatter! The skyscraper scattered into atomatized dust. The island, its unattainability extolled, had swallowed whole the despair of its many challengers. And that which remained of this once proud thing that boasted of its untouched knowledge. Azure mist bemoaned its demise. The ice canopy in the sky crumbled. The snark-hunting bullet jumped over the moon. Its throes of death sounded like the roaring sea, reverberating across this very tail land. The battle was over. The thick fog dissipated, and the shattered ice melted away before it hit the ground. A lethal bullet had topped the Night King along with his throne, affording him no time to grieve his loss. The oil of the moon, the untouched flat snark, the dreamscape that had begun with its resurrection ended with its demise, drawing a close to this nightmare.
Ugh, さすがに無茶だ。
Ein bisschen. Oh, ich liebe diese Novel. Flat on her back, Aoko looked up at the night sky. She lay there, perfectly still, not able to move a single finger. When she tried, her whole body screamed out in agony. She was completely empty of magical energy, and her magic rest had come to a halt. She estimated that it would likely require a whole day to recover all her bodily functions. Sadly, all she could really do in that moment was take a brief breath. At least her chest was swelling with pride. She had gone toe-to-toe with a fairy tale monster and had emerged victorious. The battlefield conditions had favored her, it was true, but there was no denying that Aoko had come a long way in the last 6 months.
それはそれとして、アリスには謝っとかないと。
Huh.
プロイって壊したらそれっきりだものね。
Flat Snark would never again return to this world. It was an insanely rare item, so invaluable that it would have been impossible to price it for an auction at the association in London. Aoko had sent Alice's priceless treasure of the Magecraft Vault to oblivion. Needless to say, things had gotten more than a little out of hand.
まあ、でも。
They had both agreed to the fight, so Alice probably would not complain. Even if she was furious, she would never be so undignified as to show it. The second Aoko relaxed, her fatigue finally caught up with her. She did everything in her power to fight off the overwhelming drowsiness. Aside from a few minor internal injuries, her body was miraculously unscathed, so much so she felt that she could probably stand up and dust herself off after a bit of rest. The golden moon continued to burn in the night sky.
正体は油だものね。そりゃいつまでも燃え。
Aoko's bleary eyes went wide in astonishment. She was still unable to lift a finger.
そっか。スナークを見つけたベイカーも最後は一緒に消えるんだっけ。
Oh. She sighed in resignation. Aoko accepted that her final stand left her with only 10 seconds before she burned to ash too. Elsewhere, just a short moment prior, buffeted by strong winds atop their roller coaster, Soshiro gravely peered down at the ground. All he could muster was a single murmur. He could see Aoko on top of some drawing on the ground and...
なんだあれ。いくらなんでも頑丈すぎないか。
In the distance, there was something familiar in the direction of the ruined house mirror. Oh my God. Willst du mich verarschen? Ist die Puppe noch am Leben? Sojiro's job to throw Aoko's hair from a great height was complete. While not the most impressive of tasks, it was absolutely a matter of life or death. And to top it all off, just thinking about how he was going to get back down to the ground was making him dizzy. He had experienced more than enough trouble for one day.
いや、でも、あれ。
Oh. He was flustered as he stood atop the swaying bridge. A skull suddenly appeared in the sky above. On the ground, he could see a circling blue light with Aoko Aosaki in the middle of it. And one more thing. A shadow was approaching Aoko that only someone from his vantage point could see. A shadow missing the lower half of its body. Ai, willst du mich verarschen? The upper half of its body was slowly clawing its way to Aoko. They were still over 600 feet apart. Unfortunately for Aoko, she completely failed to notice it approaching from behind.
遠くて見えないけど、あれは。
He was sure of what it was now. There was only one thing in the park that would chase Aoko and not him, the puppet.
いや、でも、ほら、あるいは、ひょっとして、ただの偶然ではないだろうか。
His mind ran in circles. It was a perfectly reasonable reaction. Any grip on reality he might have had left was long lost when Aoko started firing beams of light at the monstrous moon. That face. Aoko's merciless fire buffeted the roller coaster like a storm. Just standing on it was almost enough for him to be thrown off and killed. At any rate, Sojiro couldn't fathom the situation. Should he head back to the entrance of the roller coaster and warn Aoko about the incoming threat? No, there was no way he would make it in time. And to make matters worse, there was a horde of bread down there, waiting for him. And it may very well have been the case that Aoko was already aware of the puppet and would take it out as soon as it got closer. If she was Sojiro was sure he would only be in the way. But, no. It did not seem like there was anything he could do to help. And beyond that, Aoko was not the only one in danger. He was in quite the predicament himself. You can't go home again. The road home was never as safe as one thought. It was as true here as it had been in the mountains. The path he was on was no exception, As risky as the ascent had been, it was even more dangerous to go back down. This was no time to be worrying about others. His shaking legs reminded him that only 200 feet separated him from death.
大丈夫。それは分かっている。けど。
His head was pounding. This was reckless and stupid. Having been raised in the mountains, he was more sensitive to danger than anyone raised in the city, and just thinking about what he was about to do made his throat seize up. There was only one thing he could say for sure.
青崎のことだ。あれに絶対気づいていない。
Oh! With a sobbing shout, Soichiro started making his way down the 200-foot frame of the roller coaster. His race towards death accelerated. He never meant to speed up, but the downward slope propelled him forward. It was too late for regrets. Now that he was running, he had no choice but to go even faster. And time was not on his side. He never would have made it in time if he'd taken the long way down. Never mind the breadmen crowding the exit of the roller coaster. With the exit blocked, the outcome would be the same, whether he went slowly or quickly. There was no reason to rush to his death as desperately as he did. So what if it was futile? Soichiro cleared the doubts from his mind. He turned his attention to what he could do, keep his footing and try to arrive at the bottom as quickly as he could.
間違えるな。今大事なのは間に合うとか助けられるとかそういう結果の話じゃなくて。
He had no idea what impulses were driving his stiff limbs. He just focused on the moment, pushing past the fear and the cold logic. At his core, he was the kind of person to deal with problems head on. There would be times to think about consequences later. But hesitation was not his only obstacle.
こんな時に
The worst possible hindrance appeared at a time when not focusing on the check would mean certain death. Soichiro sensed something wrong with the egg he had been so studiously observing out of one eye. Something had changed. And at the very moment he realized it,
よそ見してる場合じゃない。
Soichiro stumbled, then instinctively caught himself. It was a miracle he had not fallen. Descending a roller coaster on foot was an act of suicide. The egg stayed right by his side, so close it was likely it would collide with him. Though he was trying as hard as he could not to look at it, he could not help but feel unease that the door-like decoration in its center was gradually opening.
ああもう畜生。なんだってこんな。
He cursed his rotten situation. And yet he refused to slow down. He ran even faster, glaring at the egg on his side.
本当おかしい。こんな状況なのになんで
Soichiro was baffled to find that he was smiling. Perhaps it had something to do with Aoko's charm. Soichiro could not tell one way or the other. He could still feel Aoko's fingers on his skin. The trust and expectation she had placed in him was etched into his heart. But what spurred him on was something entirely different. This all stemmed from a much deeper problem. It was something inside him that he could not understand at the time, but would eventually come to terms with one day.
よし、距離は今なら2メートル弱。
He carefully judged the distance as he ran down the track of death. But the distance between what? That went without saying. It was the distance between himself and the one thing that could save his life. He told himself he was going to do it over and over like a mantra. Soichiro could not believe himself. What he was about to do was incredibly stupid. But what is stupid when smart is not an option?
本当なんでそこまでやるんだ
Was machst du? Amidst all, he laughed at how pointless such self-reflection was now. Temporary confusion, a psychological thrill ride, both had laid his soul bare. What really mattered? But a simple man gets by without deep thoughts. Sojiro's primitive mind did not crave success or reward. For him it was simple.
Yes.
He was doing it because he wanted to, not because he felt obliged to those around him. His desire to live his way was his and his own. If the egg had been equipped with a vocal function, it would have gasped in shock at what happened next. The boy, who had only tried to escape up until this point, suddenly shifted his weight. He pointed his feet outward instead of inward. On the edge of one rail, he crouched ever so slightly to maintain momentum and gazed at the floating egg.
やれる。距離的に問題はない。
Huh? He saw through the night sky. It was a flight that lasted a mere 1.5 seconds. A cordless bungee jump from 100 feet above ground. His destination? The only thing that would stop his fall, the giant flying egg. Wie groß ist das Ding? He shrieked, this time out of elation, as he desperately clung to the egg's surface. Just earlier, the cold-blooded witch had told him that without fear, the top of a building would feel no different than a balance beam. This from the same witch that would have been left speechless had she witnessed the spectacle. Fearlessness was one thing, recklessness was another. He followed it up with an act that would irritate her for days to come. Clinging to the egg, he shifted his gaze away from it. He felt the rapid descent. Sojiro, focusing his half-shut eyes on the ground, leaped off the egg once they were a few feet from the ground, then turned back to it carefully to re-establish eye contact. Something so unbelievable, so thought to Sojiro, the elevator at the department store and the mysterious floating app were both just moving objects, virtually indistinguishable from one another.
よし、割れてない。食べ物を粗末にするのは良くないと思う。
Verrätst du? He landed near the plaza. The shortcut that almost cost him his life had paid off. Sojiro took off running the second his feet touched the ground. The puppet after Aoko was the only thing on his mind. He paid no mind to the moonlight in the sky. Or the egg, furious about being used and seconds away from self-destruction and blasting fragments all over the place.
Aozaki!
Nanu?
Aoko's dumbfounded expression spurred Sojiro on. The curse was complete. The empty egg began to sing its warning to let them know there was no escape. Shrapnel from the egg exploded through the air. The ode to Queen Alice that Alice had engraved into Dumpty quickly robbed him of his senses.
それはそれとして。
He snapped back to the task at hand and ran to Aoko, still lying on the ground. His legs ran on their own accord, though he could not have ever stopped them anyway, since he could no longer feel them.
お前、驚くほどしつこいぞ。
The scrambled murder case. Piles of rubble became flowers of light blooming on the earth. The final curtain drew closed, and the defeated left the battleground. Had Alice Kuanji seen it up close, it would have left her beside herself. The two had escaped by hair's breadth. The only person in a position to witness that rare mutual destruction was the girl who had been saved from it. The boy who had never stopped running paid it no mind.
死ぬかと。
The safety of the girl in his arms meant infinitely more to him than the miraculous way in which he saved her. The moon did not wait for dawn to set. The ornamental texture of the fairy tale kingdom faded away. All of the illusions returned to the way they were before. From the ostentatious shouts reverberating through the streets, to the puppets welcoming their guests. Peace and quiet reigned once more, over a forgotten kingdom never to be awakened again. Out flickered the embers of a late night dream. Even the electric lamps that illuminated the park. Together they watched it disappear. Soichiro lay on the ground, desperately gasping for air like a fish out of water. The curse of the exploding egg had numbed his pain, and he was understandably exhausted after all he had experienced. He looked like he could be blown away by the lightest of breezes. While Aoko was also exhausted, she was still in better shape. Focused on taking deep, even breaths, she was already working to recover her strength.
あのさ、
She addressed Soichiro indifferently as her gaze remained on the amusement park. The abruptness of it was a bit theatrical in nature. She wanted to look at him as she spoke, but her pride was simply too great.
あなた、なんかすごいことしなかった？
Genauso wie du. The moment she had accepted death had seemed like an eternity. She was beside herself in shock at how indifferent she had been as the shards rained down from the moon. But a reassuring voice had snapped her back into reality. Why did he do it? What was he thinking? What moronic things did he have to do to pull it off? She had no answers for these questions, lying on the ground as she was. All she knew was that he had more than made up for his failures in the House of Mirrors, and then some, in those fateful final moments. She addressed him, hoping to find answers, but found herself unable to probe any further. To dig any deeper would feel like defeat, which is why it was so unlike her to ask him in the first place. Lucky for her, Soichiro had neither the capacity nor sensitivity to understand how egocentric she was being.
すごいって、それは青崎の方だろ。
He stuttered between labored breaths. It was taking him so much effort just to breathe that he could not address her properly. She watched him out of the concern of her eyes. Thinking back on it, the boy had performed the same role each time. Each and every time, he did what he could in spite of his feckleness. It was far more admirable than her nearly suicidal tactic, even if she did defeat her opponent. he did not even recognize how extraordinary his last act of courage was.
提案。あいつをやっつけるのに協力したら、俺のことは見逃してくれる？
At the very least, he had the courage to keep trying whatever he could. A spectator might have viewed him as a supporting actor. His actions were not exactly memorable. But the lead actress he supported did not see it that way.
まあね、認めたくないし、口になんてもっとしたくないけど。
Such inspired actions were wasted in a supporting role. This guy really pulled off the impossible. It was so amazing that she wanted to shout it as loud as she possibly could, for all the world to hear.
青崎？
ほんと、人畜無害もどうすぎると侮れないわ。
All Aoko could do was sigh. How could she not? Even she was forced to admit that the way he snatched her from the jaws of death was dashing.
ま、評価甘めだけど。
Truth be told, he was a lunatic for doing what he did. She steadied her breathing and composed herself. She was in a bad shape, and she had her bride as a mage to consider, which was why she needed to maintain an air of dignity when making a proclamation.
しずきくん、見逃すのは今日だけって話だったけど、あれ、なしでいいわ。
Oh?
とりあえず、命は助けてあげるから。
She hastily extended her right hand. It was either to shake his or to help him up. However, Soichiro did not take her hand, but instead stood up on his own. This night, despite the sheer insanity that he had just experienced, his face had not once looked as incredulous as it did now.
何そのリアクションは。
She stammered, worried that she had deeply embarrassed herself. Soichiro's gaze was fixed upon Aoko. A problem had dawned on Aoko. Though she normally hated being stared at, this time she did not mind. Rather, she was enjoying the warmth in his eyes and felt like it was something she could almost come to appreciate. Don't you get it? This isn't just about friendship, and I didn't mean he only likes you either. Believe me when I say that Sonochi really... The conversation came rushing back. It was a memory better left forgotten.
いかん、それは違う。
Pushing Tobimaru's words out of her mind, Aoko turned to Soichiro.
それとこれは別だから。
Oh my god.
私はあんたのこととか、ほんとどうでもいいんだから。
Puzzled, Soichiro tilted his head.
さっき嫌いだって言われたけど。
He responded matter-of-factly to her sudden declaration. She certainly had pointed it out, and to his face no less. It had a mere figure of speech that he was not meant to take literally, but now was not the time to belabor the point.
そうじゃなくて、あなたが私に惚れてても期待しないでって言ってるの。
Oh no. Yet belabor she did anyway. Aoko blushed slightly, realizing how inane she was being. She wondered how she'd ended up in this position. And yet she knew that she had to get this off her chest. All that was left was to politely wait for his response. I can't date you. Such heartbreakingly painful words were too much for the simple boy to hear. His shoulders slumped as if the world was coming to an end, and also Aoko thought. On the contrary, Soichiro was sitting here in deep thought.
俺が青崎に惚れてるって？
Soichiro murmured the words as if they were a magic spell. She shot right back with the affirmative. After a moment of deep contemplation, the boy turned to the expectant girl and said,
なんで？
He had to be joking, but he was not. He was completely serious. He liked her, but he didn't like her. Of course, the vice president had jumped to conclusions. This boy had no interest in romance. He probably didn't even know what that was. She was incredibly embarrassed by how confused Soichiro still appeared to be. Her rose complexion spread throughout her.
もう一度聞くけど、なんで？
Einfach die Klappe.
そりゃこっちが聞きたいわよ飛び丸の大バカ野郎
Just like that. She had lost her cool and given in to an unjustifiable outburst. It was time to seal off the area and destroy evidence. Aoko's embarrassment devolved into panic, and her grudge against Tobiru suddenly manifested as criminal assault. She lashed out with a punch that could have taken down a bird mid-flight. More specifically, it was a brutal right hook. Aoko blinked. Her blow had connected with something solid, snapping her out of her reverie. Her temper had lashed out at the completely defenseless Soichiro. It had been a splendid blow with all her weight in behind it, knocking him out cold. Soichiro groaned, grumbling to the ground. Her punch finished the job that the curse had started. If not for the discomfort on his face, he appeared almost to be sleeping. Aoko convinced herself that he was napping, not concussed.
いっか。予定通りになったものね。
The tension in her shoulders eased away as she looked down at Soichiro. A ton had gotten in her way over the course of today, but the day was saved. For now. With nobody left to butt heads, she felt exhaustion finally overtake her. Ist Alice nicht immer noch hier irgendwo?
歩いて帰れるかな、私。
Her fatigue was enough to make her complain out loud. When she thought about it, she realized that this was the first time she had used up all of her magical energy, and the first time she had participated in a battle of this scale without any prior preparation. Though in truth,
私一人じゃどっちも相打ちだったっけ。
she felt somewhat proud as she whispered those words. Normally, it was something that she would beat herself up over, but instead she simply shrugged her shoulders with a bitter smile. After all, it was thanks to the person sleeping by her side.
ね、聞こえてないわよね。
As if the night had swallowed her voice before it reached him, she received no response. Confident, she continued in an even quieter voice.
ありがとう。十分に助けてもらったわ。
Of course, there was no response from Soichiro, and she was not expecting one. Saying it for the record was enough. Aoko watched Soichiro sleep for a while, and then pulled something out of her pocket. It was the palm-sized glass bottle her roommate had given her, which she opened with a pop.
でも、それとこれとは別だから。
Leaving behind words colder than a winter chill at night, she called out his name. She barely sensed the bottle moving. As the silhouette of the fallen boy appeared to blur, she got the feeling that the weight of the bottle had increased slightly.
うわ、どうなってんだろうこれ。
What appeared to be human form could clearly be seen inside the glass. Alice Quanshi's tools were mystiques that confounded even the most knowledgeable of mages. As soon as Aoko tried to analyze them with logic or reason, she was already out of her depth. Knowing this all too well, Aoko closed the bottle and watched the boy disappear, as if by some magic trick.
まったく、こんなの手品じゃなくて魔法だって。
Kidnapping! She muttered as she looked into the magical bottle. Its way had not changed significantly, and she had no idea how it worked. But the one thing she did know was that there was a human being inside of it. Its light weight was almost unnerving, closer to empty air than a human being. It was about as heavy as one could expect if they bottled a summer breeze. Though that did fit her image of Soichiro perfectly.
アリスの言う通り。
She muttered to no one in particular as she recalled the past.
ほんと、私らしくない。
Aoko wore a bittersweet smile. Her usual moodiness was gone. It was a dangerous world out there. It was good to have someone to keep her on her toes. With a wry chuckle, she flicked the magical bottle with her finger and set off walking. She could hear a bell in the distance, signaling the end of the play. An ephemeral dream gave way to reality. In the grand scheme of things, it had been but an instant. As the actors exited the stage left, the last of the lights silently flickered out. And so the long-dead amusement park played its final role, as a memory for a boy and a girl.